My name is Philip Lee, and I was associated with the Baltimore Harbor Watershed Association. And my role initially, I was one of the co-founders, and we were organized initially to address the trash in the harbor. And really, the overall role of the Baltimore Harbor Watershed Association from 2003 to the merger was to address trash through policies and actions.
I was on the Baltimore Harbor Watershed Association board, and I got involved because I was interested in nonprofit board service, and I went through a match program with Baltimore Volunteers Unlimited to meet with the different groups. And after meeting with Phil Lee, I realized that BHWA was my home. I got involved with the merger. I was one of the people from our board that was part of the group that met at Irvine Nature Center to really hash out some challenges. And I think my biggest concern at the time was that we just didn't want our initiatives and our constituents to get absorbed by some humongous new organization we were going to lose the flavor of the individual watersheds. So that was heavy on my mind when we were moving into early merger discussions.
I am living in the Jones Falls watershed, and at the time of the merger, I was a board member of the Jones Falls Watershed Association. I had a role of just being a board member, but I think that my particular focus was on seeing the Watershed Association become regional so that the city could be held accountable for the harbor. I work on the harbor, on Baltimore Harbor, as a scientist, and it was really important to me to see that the harbor become a focus.
So I was a member of the Herring Run Watershed Association. I had started working with them because I was at Morgan State University working with community engagement and outreach. Working with the Herring Run Watershed Association was a wonderful opening to a new universe for me. Most of my social activities, energies were kind of focused on things that you've probably seen in the news recently with police shootings, 911 calls for somebody asking you to put your dog on a leash. Those type of things were pressure points, especially for the African American community, ready to march and protest at a moment's notice when stuff like that happens, but not so much in terms of the environment. And so my predecessor on the Herring Run Watershed Association board was Evan Richardson, who at Morgan was with the landscape architecture department with our School of Architecture and Planning. So he asked me to join, and I happily did. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience, one of the best things that I was able to participate in. There was, as we go through, and again, I guess I kind of had a big headish thought that the Herring Run Watershed Association was really doing pretty well, and we thought we were doing some really fantastic things. And so when the idea of the merger came up, we're like, okay, this is good. This is good. And one of my efforts with the Herring Run Watershed Association was to indeed try to figure out how we could get the larger community, especially the African American community, more involved in these environmental efforts. We were somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 or maybe, I don't think we were 15 board members. And so we selected, I think there were 3 of us, it could have been 4, that were going to participate in the talks about how to bring this merger about. And so I was one of the ones selected to participate.
Hi, I'm Kathy Brill with the Roush Foundation.
Kathy.
My role was to be one of the early funders of the merged organization. And I think my role before that was to be annoying because early on when I first started with the foundation in 2004 and around 2005, I saw all these great, small, very fragile watershed organizations and thought, gosh, couldn't they be stronger if they could work together? And so I just kept asking, have y'all ever thought about merging? Maybe y'all should merge. I just think it was being annoying for about 10 years. But then I think one of the other things that we tried to do, and I include other funders in this, was to fund the watersheds to do collaborative projects together to start to build those relationships to see, could they work together and would that be a good thing?
So Fiona Newton, I have worked in the Jones Falls watershed for the last 17 years and used to be on the Jones Falls Watershed Association, although I do live in the Herring Run watershed. So my role in the founding was as a member of the Jones Falls Watershed Association. I was one of the 3 board members that was selected to be founding board members of the new organisation. And I think in terms of my hopes for the organisation, it's pretty much what Kathy was referring to, which was really about the impact that we could all have if we came together and pooled our resources. It was really clear, all of us were struggling with fundraising, doing some projects with the limited resources that we had, but I could see that the funding community would appreciate us collaborating to a greater degree. And it's also about the sustainability of the organisations, being able to attract more people who are interested in the environment to accomplish more for Baltimore's environment and waterways, working together and collaborating.
I'm Fran Flanagan. I live literally on the fall line of the Jones Falls and the Herring Run watersheds. And my role in this, I wish David Carroll had signed on because he had a very important role in the founding of Blue Water Baltimore in that he worked for DEPRM in Baltimore County. He hired me at, 2002 or something like that, to get acquainted with all of the environmental groups that DEPRM was trying to work with. And so I, one by one, went out and met all the different watershed groups, went to their meetings and so forth. And I guess after a year or so of doing that, it occurred to me that there was an awful lot of duplication, an awful lot of parallel work, not enough money for any of them to really thrive. And so David and I started talking about, maybe we've got the kernel of something here. And people like Phil were involved in early meetings. I remember Phil at my house at the dining room table talking about, well, what should we be doing here? One thing led to another. I think everybody probably knows the story of how we finally made this happen. But the biggest and the fondest memory I have is some people saying, you can't make this work. 2-way mergers hardly ever work. What are you thinking about as far as a 5-way merger? It just won't work. And clearly it has worked. So I think it's been a very gratifying thing to be involved with over the years.
One of my fondest memories is that at the meeting that we had, the organization meeting we had out at the Irvine Nature Center, is that I was living at the time in Reservoir Hill and had decided to ride my bike up there. And I had, as perhaps I typically do, overestimated my powers. And so I got there late and tired. But it was a good meeting, and it was good seeing all the folks from the different watershed associations, because I hadn't really known any, if at all. So it was good meeting them. And one of the points that I remember us talking about in depth was, where was it going to be located? And because the Herring Run Watershed Association had an office that was a LEED certified silver level building, I think finally we decided to be there, but not without a lot of different conversations about it.
Being around all of the people in those organizations, as difficult as some of the merger discussions were and all of the struggles, is one of the most positive parts of my life, is to be around people who care about these kinds of things and are willing to work at it, and bring together all those organizations. I think it was really enriching for me to be involved in these bigger discussions of how do we bring it together? How do we broaden and diversify who this alliance is?
When the merger occurred, I said, thank goodness, I finally got a life. So being involved with the Baltimore Harbor Watershed Association, we really only had one part-time staff person, and that was only for a few years. And in the meantime, I was the board secretary, president, and really act as the executive director, and still working as an engineer full time. So when the merger happened, again, like I said thank you.
There were, in the very beginning, it was hard to find, at least as I recall, hard to find the right, if you will, right executive director. I think we maybe had somebody in the very beginning who didn't work out all that well. Once we got settled in terms of, and once the organization got settled in terms of staffing, I think it just took off, because it obviously, to run any kind of organization, and especially a new one with made up of 5 parts, the staff part of it was very, very important.
I chaired the committee that did that search, and we made a disastrous choice, and we almost blew up the alliance with our choice. And we all worked as hard, we did our very best, and we made a mistake. And that's, I hate to say that we should have made the mistake, but I think that that mistake and getting over it and getting past it was strengthening for the organization. It tested us, and I think it brought out the best in a lot of people.
My biggest role after the founding was to provide money and to rally other funders. One of the funders were excited and intrigued by this, but some were wary. It was a fragile merger at first, as I think they all are, especially if you're looking at 5 organizations. And there were some bumps in the road, and funders were concerned. And so I spent time vouching for the organization and getting other funders to commit, and convincing them that they needed to commit for longer terms rather than shorter terms. And a lot of funders really stepped up.
Knowing that there were funders who were willing to give this organization a chance was critical. Without those initial grants, I don't think the organization would have succeeded, because there weren't very many individual donors in the beginning. I think Blue Water's done a great job in the last 10 years in building a base of support that's very broad, but that didn't exist, in the beginning the way it does now. So I think that I think that's an important aspect of the success of the organization.
We did a lot of work at the beginning to develop policies and procedures to make sure that everyone was comfortable with, what we were going to be doing in terms of actually enforcing, when necessary, flagrant violations of the Clean Water Act and permit violations and things like that. And so, I think that we've reached a point. I mean, I remember one board meeting where, folks who had previously been, I don't want to say resistant to the idea of the waterkeeper, but had just had some concerns early on, some nervousness about, how this would work. And we were talking about whether or not we were going to go ahead and take some action. And that individual was just adamant that this was something we had to do. All of our talking points that we had been using from the beginning were coming out of someone who had been resistant. And at that point I thought, my work here is done. Like we have buy-in, everybody understands, what the waterkeeper can do, and that, we're not trying to be a legal organization that does nothing but, run around and sue people and try to hit them over the head with our hammer. That's not what the waterkeeper does. And I think that for me was, just a feel-good moment for sure, because I was like, finally, you know, we have everybody on the same page. And so, you know, that I think is where we are now, and you know, I think where we continue to be. I mean, the Waterkeeper is just so vital to our mission, and you know, I don't think that we would be a credible organization without it. So, one of the things that was a consistent theme when we were discussing merger was that we wanted to be a go-to science-based organization regarding water quality issues and how to improve the water quality, how to communicate with the constituents about our mission, all of that. We wanted to be the group that others sought out, that saw us as, well, these are the right people to talk to. They're going to know the answer. They're going to be able to help.
I do remember one moment fairly early on when I got a call from somebody at Blue Water Baltimore, and they were so excited that the city had requested to meet with them about an issue. I thought, oh my gosh, because all the 5 legacy organizations had spent so long pounding on the door and trying to get the city to meet with them about critical issues, and here they were being called on, and I thought that's exactly why we did this.
It's become an organization, I think, with pretty high name recognition for an environmental group in Baltimore. I think it is a go-to group not only for people who have problems, but also for communities, for organizations that are looking for information, for people that are looking for a way to engage in issues related to our streams and the harbor. You know, those are all very positive kinds of things, I think.
The thing that I think I love the best about having been part of the birth of Blue Water Baltimore is seeing those statements and comments in the papers and in the news where Blue Water Baltimore has said this, and Blue Water Baltimore is considered, or at least my perception from the way that they are talked about in the news, is a valuable piece of making Baltimore better.
I think it's become the voice for water in Baltimore, which was something that we all identified at the beginning was missing. There was no one to speak. People were speaking for, you know, sub-watersheds. And while for those of us who are sort of nerdy about water and geography, that's perfectly fine for the rest of the world, it's pretty confusing. And so becoming the voice for water is important. I think it's become a strong urban environmental advocacy voice in Annapolis with the General Assembly. And that's something that's sorely needed not to counteract, but to balance all the other voices that are there. It's become a strong legal challenger, and I really appreciated Robin's comments about the early conversations about the Waterkeeper in or Waterkeeper out. I remember that debate. We felt very strongly that the Waterkeeper should be one of the tools in the toolbox, and I think that's proven to be very, very effective. And I think Blue Water Baltimore has become the entity that holds the local and state governments and individual polluters accountable for water pollution in the area.
I think the one thing that I'm really impressed with that I can't take credit for because I thought it wasn't going to come to be was that Blue Water Baltimore is an important creator of scientific information about water quality in Baltimore City, in the streams and in the harbor. They have a lot of credibility for the data that they collect on water quality. The city also collects data, but they're not as open to sharing it, and they're using it for different purposes. So I think that the scientific credentials of Blue Water Baltimore are really important, and that gets to the importance, I think, that hard facts, that data, that evidence have in terms of changing policy. I think we're fortunate that we have city agencies and other organizations that believe in data, that they don't just discount facts. But the facts on the ground can change things, and I think that Blue Water Baltimore is showing that. On a personal level, as a scientist who's working on the ecology of Baltimore Harbor, it's really great to have Blue Water Baltimore as a collaborator. Other people within the University of Maryland system now look to Blue Water Baltimore for collaboration with either fieldwork or data or thoughts and priorities. So I have to credit Blue Water Baltimore with helping get me to do my research in the harbor, but I think that they're a real part of the scientific community in urban water research.
There's so many things that Blue Water has become, which I don't think we were to the same extent when we were the separate organisations. And we haven't mentioned the Herring Run Native Plant Nursery yet today. And that was a project of the Herring Run Watershed Association. And that's just an example of where Blue Water's been able to take a program within the organisation, and by expanding the resource behind it and outreach to a broader community, we've really created a thriving, integrated program that promotes the natural environment, plants that are good for stormwater runoff mitigation, and also good for the environment. And I know Baltimore's Master Gardeners now help out regularly with that program. So I'm just using that to illustrate how one program really grew. But I, when I think about, I've been involved in going out and helping to plant street trees or neighbourhood parks in East Baltimore, and just seeing and thinking about the extent to which our tree planting team has gone out and engaged with partners around Baltimore to accomplish sort of shading of streets, improving local environment in disadvantaged neighbourhoods, and also thinking about the educational outreach team who've been really creative and thinking about art installations and art exhibitions, engaging local community to help them understand the environment and think more about the environment that's around them and appreciate it and educate them about what they can do to improve their environment. So these are just some examples of the work that we're doing that certainly we weren't doing to the same volume or impact when we were separate organisations. Not to mention some of the restoration projects that we've done over the last 10 years. And those projects, for me, really illustrate, they're an example of Blue Water demonstrating to others what can be done to help manage problems like stormwater and improvement of the environment in their neighbourhoods. So to that extent, I think we're not just a voice, but we're actually hands-on, being able to really demonstrate how people can improve their own environments, whether it's at their home, their place of work, or in their communities.
I think that one of the things that's really been a hallmark of the organization, though, has to do with the people that are on this call and all the others who are not. It's been the most amazing group of individuals who have come together and brought their talents, their passion, their commitment to Baltimore all to the table. And as you think back over the years, you can hardly think of a person who you wish wasn't there. They've all the board members and all the other people who have been participants in the growth of Blue Water, I think, have just been an amazing collection of people.
I hope it continues to be a place for young people to launch and develop their careers. One of the best things about the size that Blue Water Baltimore is now is that you can bring on a number of young people interested in the environment and then help them grow up a career ladder. So I hope that continues. My second is that the strength in advocacy continues and grows, because I do think that's the most important thing that Blue Water Baltimore has brought. And the third is that Blue Water Baltimore can use its convening role to be more active in the environmental justice space and fight for communities that have been environmentally disadvantaged in the city.
I used to live in Reservoir Hill. My ex-wife still does. She goes for daily walks in Druid Hill Park. And just the other day, she ran into the Blue Water Baltimore employee named Zoe, and had asked Zoe if there were any trees or anything like that she could take back to her house to plant. And she was so impressed with Zoe's abilities and willingness and ingenuity to help her. She was just bragging about Blue Water Baltimore because of the impact that Zoe had on her life. And so my birthday wish for Blue Water Baltimore is that there are 1,000 different interactions between Blue Water Baltimore and the Baltimore community that mirror the interaction that my ex-wife had with Zoe.
I'm seeing a trajectory of being more inclusive and being more successful at being inclusive in Baltimore. I think that I'd like to see Blue Water continue to be successful in getting into neighborhoods outside of the main corridor in the harbor, but extending into the west side and talking to people on the east side, and really diversifying the input, and that it continues to be an organization that invites everybody and isn't afraid of new people and new ideas.
My hope for the future is, most importantly, that Blue Water is sustainable, that it's not going to go away. I hope if we are all able to come back and have this conversation 10 years from now, we're going to find that we live in a greener city, a city that has clean water, clean streams, and a clean harbor, and a city that, not really just a city, a region where people are really committed to the environment, and that organizations like Blue Water aren't considered to be negative. They're considered to be a really important, positive part of what it's like to live in a wonderful community. And I think that has to do with all the things people have talked about: more inclusion, more engagement, more positive news about what a clean environment's all about.
I would wish the organisation energy, enthusiasm and persistence, because environmental issues are not easy to address, and it takes a village, literally, the whole of Baltimore and beyond. So on that, I'd say happy 10th birthday to Blue Water Baltimore.